How's it going, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the James Loud Podcast. Today we're doing it remote from my house, and my special guest for today is Brandon Rust from Bokashi Earthworks. How you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
Fantastic. So yeah, you have a long history with the plant. You have a long history with podcasting, from Future Cannabis Projects to several other podcasts. I'm glad to have you as a guest today.
Thanks. Yeah, I really enjoy plant science, and I have a large library of knowledge that gotten to take deep dives into. I read a lot of science white papers too, and I find out, and I've kind of figured out what the practical application for a lot of the sciences for some of these different processes that are happening in nature, and how we can apply them into systems and replicate that and show it on data.
Really cool. So for our guests that don't know who you are, give us a little background on how you got started in cannabis and then what you do.
Sure, yeah. My name's Brendan Rust. I've been cultivating since about 2001, 2002, right around there. I got into it because some of my dad's younger homies, which were my older homies, kind of brought me under their wing, and they had already been growing for a couple of years. And I was just doing a bunch of bullshit working with those guys. They were having me like mow their yard and wash their dog. And I was just a kid back then. I was just a teenager. And, washing hydrocorn rock and shit so they could reuse it in their hydro system, doing stuff like that. And I knew what they were doing, but they kind of tested me. I did it for a while before I ever got to see the inside of a garden. So it's kind of like their little bitch.
A little Miyagi approach, some Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi approach.
It really was, dude. They kind of tested me. They wanted to see if I was willing to put in the work. And they were also being cautious because they wanted to fucking protect their own asses. And I have a interesting story because I actually grew up in foster care, but I met my father who got sent to prison in '96, and he's still in prison. But I got in touch with him through my my mom after I became an adult when I turned 18. And he basically was like, hey, go meet some of my friends, and so I did. And that's kind of how those relationships built. So they knew who I was, but they couldn't vouch for me back then. I was just some fucking punk kid, and so I did all the things, and I worked my way in, and I got to know the guys, and then they finally brought me in. And first thing I actually did when they brought me in was I cut open a galvanized steel conduit to steel power, because one of them was an actual electrician. So he knew how to do all the electric work, but he needed wires to clamp onto. So that's the first thing that like really got me in there. Because after I did that, they were like, they paid me like $2,000. I was super fucking stoked. I was like, yeah, this is such a come up, dude. I was, because that was like at the time probably one of the times where I just got a big ass chunk of change, where I was like, fuck yeah, dude, I just got fucking paid 2 G's right there. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's like 10 grand in today's terms.
Yeah. So, yeah, but I started working with those guys. I worked with those guys, Dirty Harry and Triple D down in San Diego. They actually are the ones who created the Afghani bull rider, not to be confused with the original bull rider, but this was the original bull rider crossed to an Afghan, and we ran that from probably about 2001 to real hard until about 2009. But I worked with them for about 2 years. Then I had my own partners that I worked with, and had different grows here and there, and nice. Got into a bunch of trouble, went to prison a couple times.
Wow.
I ended up, every time I was locked up, I was like, I got to get the hell out of California, this place. And as soon as I did, everything kind of changed. I got out here to Oklahoma. I started working in the legal market out here. I was able to take the business that I had started in San Diego and incorporate it out here. And I've been able to really focus in on the cannabis agronomy and microbiology side, and taking a look at the cultivation system holistically. from everything from, biosecurity and integrated pest management to um, soil fertility, health and management, data collection, environmental, management, all, everything that we do in cannabis cultivation.
Nice. And so then tell us about Bokashi Earthworks.
So it initially started with I went on to this Facebook group in like 2014. It was called the Probiotic Farmers Alliance, and they were talking about soil microbiology and about bokashi, which is usually a like a fermented organic waste that you can use as basically a biofertilizer. So there was a whole group that was dedicated, and that group still exists, to my knowledge. It sparked my interest, and I was at a time. This was around 2014 when the price of cannabis started to really drop. Because when we started, we were selling pounds for $4,800 a pound or $300 an ounce, all the way up. No matter how much you got, like it didn't matter. That was the price, and people were willing to pay it. And then we would, go up to Northern California to the people that would be running diesel generators, and they'd have like 100 or 200 lights, which we couldn't really bust that big. We had multiple houses where you'd have like 12 lights here, maybe like 4 lights over here, another 4 lights over here. But we'd go pick up like larger packs up in Northern California and bring those down. But the prices started to decrease over time. And I remember specifically it was 2014. I was in San Diego, and all the way that they did like the permitting, you could get like a dispensary license, but it wouldn't be like zoned, so you would just get fined. And so people were just like, okay, cool, we'll just take fine. So all these shops started popping up, and then everybody started cultivating, and it was like, and the landscape started to change. That's the period for me when I really started noticing it, because pounds were at like 25 or $2,400. And I was like, damn, dude. I was like, I wonder if it's gonna, like it left me in a place thinking like, okay, I'm gonna have to rethink like the way that I'm doing this, because I need to decrease my overhead. That's what actually drove me into organics. It was because I wanted to figure out how to reduce my overhead. And um, you know, I just went for it because I was like, let's try it. I delved into some of the bro science, I guess. Looked at a lot of the old recipes like Subcool recipe and Coots recipe, and different recipes that I could find online. I didn't have a great success, and I was running. I ran the 2 gallon ebb and flow buckets, with the hydrocorn rocks and the little 4 lighter pattern checker. And I remember the first grow that we ever did. It was a 4 bedroom house, and the whole place was converted. It had three 4,000 watt flowering rooms, 1,000 watt bedroom, and we'd be pulling out 36 plants for every room every like 2 weeks or something like that. And we had a little checkerboard, metal halide, HPS, doing the ebb and flow. And I did that same exact system for like 11 years. And I think I ran general, 3-part general with some like maybe some additives here and there. And I
Three
did
three part
that.
by
And then I
itself
did
was
some.
good though. I mean, I think a lot of us grew up using 3 part for the time. That was what a lot of us had to work with.
It was good though. I mean, we were doing the same thing. We had our Hanometer that was like the size of a brick, and it was like they're indestructible.
Yeah.
We'd be still measuring our ppms and measuring our pH and topping off our resis and all that shit. I ended up like losing a whole room because like the AC failed or like a pump failed. I don't even know what it was, but it was like something mechanical in the room failed, and it was like fucking whole room went down, lost it. And I was like this fucking sucks, dude. That's like thousands of fucking dollars that were fucking lost, and so I ended up kind of just switching over to like potting mix, but uh I was still running newts, I did that for like a year before I switched out completely over to organic. And I had to relearn everything, because once I started trying to build soils and like figure it out, Dude, I was like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Like, I got to figure this out. That's basically what happened. I've been doing a certain thing that worked really, really well. But once I like changed up the protocol and like veered from something else, it was like I had to relearn and like understand the science and what I was like, why do I need to add this? Why do I need to add this? What's, and finding out all the nuances of what elements are there for what and what how the levels of where those should be in accordance to, total soluble nutrition of that nutrient in the soil.
Right. So you went to school for agronomy, or was that later, or you're all self-taught?
No, I'm all self-taught. So what I ended up doing was I started to, before I ever got into the commercial side of cultivation, I was doing soil testing because I wanted to understand the the soil levels. I wanted to try to figure that out so I could like create a program that was that was basically organic, that was all organic, that I could implement into a program, a complete program, and not have to guess at, because here's the issue. Like, I've always been able to grow great wheat, but if I have an issue that, like, let's say appears during week 4 of flower, and I am addressing it as that deficiency symptom appears, or that, or whatever that symptom of whatever it might be appears. By the time that symptom appears, we're already probably about 50% into like a deficiency, for example. So if I'm like running my plants and all of a sudden, dude, everything's fucking getting yellow at the bottoms and I'm running out of nitrogen, it's like, oh shit, that I shouldn't be doing. I shouldn't be running out of nitrogen. I want to know how much I should have had in that system at the beginning so that we're not running out through the system, so that we can do, basic, soil builds that contain the proper amount of nutrition that'll allow us to do very, very minimal maintenance and get great results, not just quality, but that can compete on the quantity side as well.
Right, and consistency. So every time you do it, you get the same results or similar results.
Yeah. And so here's the thing. So like whenever we're running a program, or like anybody, people that I work with. So in the instance that they're using my soil comes built, it already meets the target nutritional levels that are built for cannabis. So I already know what they are as far as the total amount of nutrition that needs to be in soil, how it falls into solution. And when we're looking at how we do that, we're looking at standard soil tests and then a saturated paste test. So a standard test will show you collectively what's in the soil, and then a saturated paste test allows you to see every single element in the parts per million that's falling into solution. So as you water that soil, as the mineral ions that the plant observes, the mineral nutrition, whether it's the phosphate anion or the divalent form of calcium, magnesium, potassium, any of those things, they all they fall into the solution, right? And they're uptaken in or diffused across the membranes with the water. And we can actually look at all of the mineral ions that are in the water with the saturated paste test. So instead of just looking at the EC and the ppm, I can look at those two factors, plus I can look at every single individual element. I can look at phosphorus and calcium and potassium, and I can also look at all my secondary, all my micronutrients. I can look at things that are antagonistic, like bicarbonate and sodium and chloride, and things that I know if they're going to be high in soil, it's going to cause antagonisms, and that system can be out of balance if those things are too high. So I'm able to look at different types of data on soil and be able to determine what I need to add into that soil if I don't meet a target on that solution. So if my target ppm is between 8 and 1,000 ppm, and then let's say calcium is between 150 and 200 ppm, and magnesium is between 32 and 40 ppm, and potassium is between 125 and 150 ppm, right? And we're looking at all of these different elements and the actual amount of availability. I know all those targets, right? So if we're looking at a soil and it's not meeting that target, I know what I need to add of what certain element to bring that target up to a sufficient level. So if someone had a soil and they came to me and they're like, hey, can you do a test for me? And I can look at their soil, I could look at their pH, I could pH balance it, I could, and let's say it's only at 400 parts per million total soluble salts, and everything's just kind of low. I can look at that soil and say, this is what you're going to need to add in the exact quantity to be able to balance the soil out. And so what I've done is I've provided, those types of services to the people that I work with. And then I also provide them with all of those individual base elements. So most people will buy a branded product, right? Like I do have branded products because I take all the stuff that we're buying in bulk and I distribute this for like home growers and stuff. But like when I'm working with commercial producers, I'm selling them 50-pound bags,
Right.
and they're very cost effective because if you buy a bag of magnesium sulfate and that's pretty much your sole source for magnesium, it's going to be very, very efficient to be able to get that into that system. It's very soluble. You can also use it in a foliar spray. And it's only about maybe $25 for a 50-pound bag,
Right.
and that's going to last, a commercial producer a long time, just that small amount, and so the larger you scale, if you're buying in bulk, these things get even cheaper. And so it becomes, you're basically operating the same way that conventional agriculture, but you're using organic amendments. You're using natural, like organic amendments and natural minerals, things like Epsom salt or gypsum. Gypsum is, calcium sulfate. Now that is considered a salt, but it's natural. It just their abundance, you can pull it out with a front loader and then they just micronize it to make it soluble. They crush it up. So it's not treated in any way. It's just kind of pulled out of the ground and crushed. And then like, here you go, here's this mineral. So we have, complete lists of what we can use as far as mineral inputs for different elements. And so I try to stick with single use elements to address single elements that need to be addressed.
So as far as testing, um, and all this started, if we go a step back, you started this as something, you were doing it for yourself and then it evolved into a business where you're helping others.
Yeah, well, I was always producing cannabis to support myself. That's what I did for forever,
Right.
and I still grow weed at home and shit, you know what I mean?
Right.
But so it's always been a business, but it was always just, fucking, slanging weed to the fucking homeboys and people that that are running delivery services, and how it goes, dude. We're
Right.
just we're trapping.
Right. Yeah.
So
But this has evolved into a real business, and
I
it,
had to, because when I got into the commercial side and people were looking at me to like, hey, like we need to like make sure I need to make sure I have to collect data somehow. I need to be able to replicate the system over and over and over again.
right.
And so that's what drove me even harder on the agronomy, because before I got into the commercial space or the legal space out here in Oklahoma, because I'm originally from San Diego. But before I got into the legal space, I was already testing and I was already like looking into it and playing around with it. But it was like I really hit it hard, started learning, started getting books, started taking agronomy courses and things like that, so I could really, really educate myself and really understand the not just the soil science, but actually like the what I need to add and which quantities, because that's what agronomy really is. It's being able to unlock the key to the castle. If you only have, you know 75 ppm of calcium, how much gypsum do you need to add into that system to bring it up to 150? Right? I know what all those are, and I built like calculators that can all do it, automate it for me now. But it's figuring all that out and then and then putting it to practical use. Because if you have a target level for cannabis, right, that starts with testing that was done out of the 70s, and there's a book called Plant Analysis Handbook, which is where the information comes from. Like, it started off with the leaf tissue analysis and like what the percentage of calcium should be, what the percentage of nitrogen should be, all those elements. You can get a baseline because we can do not just the soil testing, but we can do the leaf tissue analysis. And if we know we're hitting the specific targets on our saturated paste and it's equating to the right percentage that we're looking for in tissue, then we know those are the right levels. But we can also look at like the overall health, like, and if you're not guessing and you know like how to grow good weed to begin with, and you can map something out, you can see what it's like to be able to push those targets and see what the standard target is that's been published in literature versus like what your healthiest crop looks like. Oh, hey, I have 6% calcium versus the 3.5 that they suggest. Because I think the calcium was like 2.2 to 3.1% calcium, if you're looking at that book, if my memory serves me. But it's like, ideally, I see that like 4.5 to 5.5 is better. But I've seen all the way up to like 8% and seen plants that were massive and they were just crushing.
Right.
So that you can learn stuff from the data too, like understanding that it's that you can almost not get too much calcium. It's just that the calcium does have antagonisms, especially with phosphorus and other cations. And so delivering too much might upset the nutrient balance. But if you can keep giving it to it, it's not going to have a negative consequence. Like, I don't think anybody's ever complained about calcium toxicity.
Right. For sure. So data points. You collect a lot of data points. Sounds like you collect a bunch. It's one of the topics that I keep going back to on my shows with different people, is like collecting data points, whether you're developing your palate or you're, looking at what potential problems are or how to improve your soil. I think data points are everything.
Yeah.
In life in general, you want to improve. Data points are the way to do it.
Well, and think about it from a business perspective too. If you cannot sit down and say, hey, these are the targets that we're reaching for, this is, the soil that I'm about to give you, this is what and be able to show them and say, here's the data, here's how this thing functions and works as a whole, and you can map it out and you can replicate it over and over again. That's what people want to see. So they can have that assurance and confidence that they're going to be able to run a program that's data driven, that is going to be replicable over and over and over, so they can not so much have to focus on trying to address deficiencies or try to figure stuff in the back end of their grow, when they can be focusing more on their brand and their marketing and their distribution and their taxes and their metric, if they have metric, their reporting, all the stuff that's included in these vertically integrated business models. So ideally the thing is to reduce overhead by using these types of systems. And a good example of this is, if you were to take something like, let's take a farm, I'm not going to mention the name, out in New Mexico that I visited. They had one greenhouse that was 80,000 square feet. Okay. And they were all running cocoa in 2-gallon pots. Now, at the end of they were doing terrible, by the way, but at the end of their run, what they do is they cut all their plant matter. They remove all of the fertigation lines from their pots. They take all those pots, they dump all of their cocoa in a pile. They'd pay to have that cocoa removed from the facility. And then they'd go wash all those buckets. They'd go refill them with cocoa. They'd go reset them on the table, hook up all the fertigation lines, right? So that's a massive amount of labor. In a soil system, you would be cutting down the material, removing it for drying and curing. Then you would be going in there. You would you would test your soil pre-harvest to get it to the lab, because it takes 5 days for the lab analytics to come back. And then you can get a recipe that basically says what needs to be added to that soil to bring it back up to nutritional sufficiency. So basically what you do is you harvest, you top dress, you plant back into that media, and then you run your program again. And so it's less labor intensive and it's more cost effective because you're not also using a bunch of fertigation salts like synthetics that have really low nutrient use efficiency. Only about 10% of what you're putting in there actually is observed by the plant, and that's why you have to constantly feed over, and that's why there's so much waste. Now, in these types of systems, you have better nutrient use efficiency, especially if you're using something like the smart carbon humate fertilizers and you're using top dress nutrients, because you're addressing carbon that holds on to plant mineral ions and deliver them into solution. And you can see how they're delivering them into solution through the data. And we're not just looking at pH and EC and temperature, but we can look at every single plant mineral ion and adjust it based off of what we add into that soil, based off of that top dress. But it's just less labor intensive. It's more cost effective. And so it's about, bringing down the production cost for people. Because look, here's the thing, dude. When we're talking about cannabis, it's become an agricultural commodity, regardless of whether it's craft, you're using it for medicinal or adult use. It doesn't really matter anymore because now it's become so commercialized. And the only way that the small guy is going to be able to take advantage of this is going to be able to by decreasing their overhead, just like small sustainable farms do.
Right.
How do we do that in cannabis? Well, we need to start by reducing our overhead, reducing our inputs, reducing our water usage, our nutrient inputs, reducing our labor costs.
Sure.
Those are all things that are all possible to do and scale with these types of systems. And it allows people to focus on the business side because it's so difficult to run a small business because there's so much competition. You have to have good marketing and you have to have good sales and distribution. And then you also have to worry about all of the back end business stuff. I know as a business person, you know that your accounting and your bookkeeping and your taxes and your reporting, and dude, that's so important, man.
Right.
It's just about making it easy, dude.
Simplifying it and making it easy. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not easy to run a business. I mean, I think growing cannabis isn't easy, but
no,
running a business on top of that is like a whole nother thing. Cause I feel like, and it's not typically you're not just, you have one person, they're not doing it all. You got several people, we all in like my business, we all wear many hats, but there's still several people and we all work synergistically together. And it's, it's not easy these days. And the price of cannabis has been low. I think there's been a lot of people struggling. And so, yeah, lowering the cost of your inputs, being as efficient as possible is going to guarantee you success for years to come if you do it right.
yep. And so that's been my main focus. I work with a lot of independent owner operators. I work with a lot of people all over the country, but I work with a really great group of people that I'm like close to because they're local to me here in Oklahoma. And I even put together like this craft farmers alliance where I'm just trying to help get everybody in the same room all together. So that way we can help with cross branding and marketing, making sure people aren't growing all the same stuff, trying to compete for shelf space, help with, education when it comes to the legislation and helping push back against shitty legislation that they're always trying to push in cannabis, which is like higher taxes, more reporting, more, increased. Just I could go on and on.
For
You
sure.
know, dude, the regulations that basically kill small businesses. And it's like
They're designed to.
and so the thing is, and what I've learned, because I'm right down the street from the Capitol and I've worked out here with another guy, Jed Green, and he runs Oklahoma Responsible Cannabis Action. And I've been up to the Capitol several times, and the only people that are up there are people that are representing business interests, right? And so there's no balance. There's not anybody representing independent business. There's not a bunch of independent people that are in business up there because they're all independently running their own businesses.
Right.
And it's like they can't go run a business and be at the Capitol to try to lobby so that they can stay in business. And it's like this vicious fucking crazy cycle that like it doesn't make sense that the average American person would have to essentially hire lobbyists just so small independent operators can function in this country. But that's exactly what's fucking happening. because the only fucking people that are up there talking to these legislators are business interests, lobbyists.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's minimal representation for the small guy.
That's what we try to do, is we want to be able to collectively represent and find people that'll represent us as a group, and not just because, look, when you are a good operator and you're transparent with what you do and you grow good product and you have your SKUs lined up and you work with people, people will come to you. You can build a brand if you have if you're consistent and people know what you're bringing to the table. You can build a brand,
Sure.
and I see it all the time. But it's hard, dude, with all the regulations.
Yeah, I mean, I believe the 1% rule. So if you're, you're in that 1%, you're usually going to be doing good. You want to strive for that, that A plus, but you want to strive for that. But, anymore, you want to strive for that 0.1% to be really successful.
Yeah.
So let's dive into a conversation about cultivars. And we were talking a little earlier before the podcast started about you have ways of dialing in specific cultivars.
Cultivar-specific nutrition. So, as you and I'm sure all your listeners have experienced, there are a lot of different nuances with the nutritional needs between cultivars. A good example of this is, maybe you might have some Afghan dominant variety that doesn't need as much nitrogen. It requires drier climates, doesn't require as much humidity. And, so you end up kind of seeing that it has some weird things with calcium that's going on. That's a good example of seeing things that I've seen, versus maybe something that's a more equatorial varietal. It grows lengthier, longer internodal spacing, narrow leaf dominant characteristics that kind of is spindly and requires maybe a shitload more calcium to nitrogen ratio to keep them a little more stout because of the way that they kind of tend to grow. So there's different nuances, whatever those nuances may be, cultivar dependent. They're usually environmental but also nutritional dependent, these kind of variances. And so, we mentioned that the different types of tests. We have what's called a standard soil test, and that gives us just an overall view of what's in the soil as a total percentage. So we're looking at our four major soil cations, which is going to be calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium. We want to see calcium around 60%, magnesium 12 to 15%, and then for cannabis, potassium, we want to see 5 to 8%. And then sodium as low as possible. It's antagonistic to all of those. And the reason why we want to have them in those ratios is because if you have 60% of the soil solution calcium, 15 to, or 12 to 15 mag, and 5 to 8 of potassium, when you look at the ppm on how they fall into solution, the parts per million of that solution will be balanced, and you're going to see kind of what we're looking for. And so that's what we're looking on that. We're also looking at the amount of total micronutrients that's in that system overall. And we're looking at nitrogen levels. And then when we're looking at the saturated paste, we can see how that soil falls into solution. Now, if let's say everything meets, where it's supposed to be and we're meeting those targets, we can also take a look at the leaf tissue. And the leaf tissue also has a target. So nitrogen has a percentage of the leaf that it should be. Potassium, magnesium, all the micronutrients, secondary nutrients, all that. And so we can gauge that. And if we have a target for a cultivar, and let's say it is between 4.5 and 5.5% in the leaf tissue calcium, and we're meeting our target, which is, let's say it's 200 ppm of calcium. That's the target of the parts per million that we want to see on a saturated paste test, because that's basically our nutrient solution that the plant is going to see in this soil. If we're seeing it and it's at 200 ppm, but we're only seeing maybe 2% of calcium in the leaf, there's a couple of things that we can analyze with that. So one is calcium is dependent on VPD. So it's dependent on the movement and transport of water through the plant. And the reason is because the plant cannot translocate calcium from its lower parts to newer growth to supplement for what it needs for new growth. It needs to be available in solution. That's why such a high percentage of calcium needs to be in solution. It's so that we can have an abundance of calcium in that leaf, so that way we can have all the signaling molecules. It's the backbone of a lot of the lignin and cellulose and all the other cellular components. When we're looking at that, and there's two ways that we can approach it. If we're not getting the adequate amount of calcium in the tissue, but it's meeting that range where it's supposed to be at 200 ppm, then we have to look at the environment, because maybe our soil is too dry or our VPD is off. And so we're not getting adequate transpiration. And that's what's responsible for calcium, because calcium moves in water, right? It's dependent on water movement. So if we don't have transpiration taking place and water movement going through the plant, then calcium isn't going to get to where it needs to be. We can look at my immediate would be, we need to be looking at VPD, because calcium is highly dependent on VPD. So if we're looking and all our VPD is in range, it's right where it should be, then we know for that particular nutrient we need to increase it. So we need to increase the nutrient concentration and the percentage of calcium on the standard soil. So we'll see an increase in the ppm. Maybe we go up to 225 ppm or 250 ppm. These are really high levels, by the way. I don't recommend this. 150 to 200 is usually max for calcium.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say it is a variety that needs more of it. We could push it by doing that, and then we could take another tissue sample. And if we see, okay, we're now at that 4.5% range by increasing the availability of calcium, then we know that we've reached our target goal. Okay, so for this specific cultivar, instead of having 200 ppm of calcium, we need 250 ppm of calcium. And so to get to that, I already know how much of what element. Like, it might be calcium silica, it might be gypsum, it might be oyster shell, it might be bone meal. It just depends on the nutrition of the soil, what I'll add to bring it up to that target level for that specific variety. And then there's another part of it too. So I can do that for all the different elements. If nitrogen is low as a percentage and I'm looking at it to be 3% and it's only 1%, then I know that I need to increase the nitrogen levels for that plant. So it works really easy. It's just numbers, and it's like I already have it all plugged in. Like it for me, it makes a lot of sense. I don't know if I'm explaining it well enough, but I can just adjust those levels, and then what we're doing is we're taking an additional test to see what happens when we've adjusted those levels. And then there's another thing what we can do is called sap analysis. And sap analysis is two different tests where you're testing fully developed photosynthetic top leaves and fully developed photosynthetic with sheer bottom leaves. And it gives a difference in nutrition, and it allows you to see how mobile nutrients like magnesium, potassium, nitrogen, phosphorus, how they move, or if they're being translocated before they'll ever show as a deficiency symptom. So if you see that like nitrogen is lower on the bottom than it is on the top, then you know that it's pulling from the lower to it's not getting enough in solution to satisfy both the bottom portion and the top portion. So the plant is actually pulling nutrition. It's catabolizing itself. It's any stored amino acids or anything like that. It'll break those down, release the nitrogen and phosphorus, and it'll send that up into the plant to where the new growth needs it, right? And so you can see that with a sap analysis, because it'll show which nutrients are being catabolized at the bottom of the plant and being taken to the top. And so if you're seeing that nitrogen is lower at the bottom, you can also increase your target on your saturated paste test to make sure that you have an adequate amount of that target nutrient. So that way they're basically level. You want to see on both the bottom and the top on a graph, you want to see them be level. That means that it's not pulling from the bottom. If the bottom graph is lower, it means it's pulling from the bottom part of the plant. And here's the thing, you can look at one of those tests before it'll ever show a deficiency symptom and preemptively act. And so that's one of the benefits, because if you're addressing a nitrogen deficiency or a potassium or phosphorus deficiency, you're usually addressing it after it's about 50% already into that deficiency symptom.
Yeah, before it's even observable, you can get a sap test, and you'll be able to see it.
Yeah, Have you done any sap testing?
No, but I'm super interested in it. It sounds awesome.
Okay, so New Age Labs, it's kind of a complicated process. I did it for 2 cultivars, and this is how I built out the program, because I knew I could do it and I wanted to test it out. And so the process is really complicated, but you're basically taking 3 or 4 standard soil, saturated paste, leaf tissue, and sap tests during the span of one cultivation cycle. So from the beginning of veg to the end of flower. And so you're basically taking a data set for a cultivar and you're mapping it out with all of the data that you're collecting from each individual one of those tests. But New Age Labs, what you'll do is you go and take, let's say you have your greenhouse, right? And you want to test this row that has all, your sour diesel in it, right? Sap, you'll take bottom from all the plant and you'll categorize that as the bottom. You'll take all the leaves from the top and you'll take 80 grams of each. And then you bag them up. I usually put paper towel so that way you can seal the bag and not have a mold, but you ship them next day in a little ice chest container, and then they'll test them within a day, and then they'll give you an analysis. So it's not real time, but it's pretty efficient.
One day is
it
pretty
works.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool the way they do it.
That's awesome.
And then Logan Labs is the lab that I use for all my testing. That's there's some really good books too. There's a book called The Art of Balancing Soil Nutrition. He's by Bill McKibben. He's a corn and soil agronomist, and he uses Logan Labs, and they have such great comprehensive data sets. And being able to start, for anybody who's interested in this stuff, that's a really great place to start, because you can look at different types of soil, you can look at different types of media, and when you would want to have frequent low dose fertigation events for different types of soil, like in outdoor soils, or nutrient or soils that hold a lot of nutrition that you don't need to fertilize a lot, so you can figure out all the different types of nuances in soil as well, and how those things will react with each other, the other elements, and how biology will work in those systems as well to help keep things in a form that's going to be available for the plant.
Really cool. Well, let's talk about genetics a little bit. What you like, what's on the horizon. I guess Oklahoma is probably different than California right now. It's like the purple craze drives me nuts a little bit, but yeah, that's the scene in California, and I feel like there'll always be a place for gas and everything.
Which ones are real popular right now where you're at?
Well, it's we're still on the RS11. We got there's a lot of stuff, but I think those type of things, you get the Zopes, the RS11s, the DO Farm stuff is definitely popular right now, and there's Lit Farms is doing crosses with them as well, with the permanent marker from JBZ. So a lot of those permanent marker crosses are now starting to hit the streets. But same thing with the RS11 crosses and the Zope crosses. Those are definitely hitting the streets from other people. But I still feel like we're going to go back towards gas. Purple candy gas is what they want now, but I feel like the green gas will make its comeback. The OGs, the classic OGs, will always have their place on the market. There's a demand for sour diesel, but it's just not available. Nobody's, and the thing is it's a long flowering cultivar, so it's
real sour diesel is it's a difficult one because of plant maintenance and flowering time, and along with that additional flowering time, again, it comes with additional nutritional requirements too. So it's just one of those, the sour diesel that was real prevalent around San Diego was, about 84 days.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do it right. And I feel like that profile, it's one, that's sour, because I was smoking some sour dub out in LA when I was out there last, and it was oh, this is this. I was immediately had nostalgia, because it was the what we called the sour OG down in San Diego.
Right. Headband, sour OG, yeah, for sure.
It was the same cultivar. I knew it immediately because it was so nostalgic, and I had grown it for such a long time. It was one of my favorites for a really long time. And so sours like that, Those I love those. I love the PK, man. That was a big one. But I'm not I'm not super picky when it comes to like my cannabis. Like I love all different flavors. I don't have anything that I don't specifically like. There's some things that I'd like to see that I haven't seen in a long time. Like I haven't smoked anything mentholated. Like I remember growing this variety called Jaw Rule, I think, or Jaw Love or something like that. It smelt like sage. Like if you walked into a room where it had been burnt, somebody was smoking it, it smelt like white sage, like distinctly smelt like white sage. And I remember that was one of the characteristics of that specific variety. And when you smoked it, it was it was like a heavy mentholated pine. It wasn't like smoky flavored. It wasn't didn't have like the sherb or it was really distinct. It was a really distinct flavor. I haven't seen anything like that in a really long time.
Yeah, not incensey, but a lot of the stuff like we get menthol stuff occasionally, but we cull most of the menthol. Like any of the, I don't know. We go through so many different things, and we find some interesting stuff. And like menthol, it depends on what level of menthol. Like I can see it as negative, but I know what you're talking about as something that's actually tastes amazing and kind of adds to it, especially if you get some pine in there.
Fucking everything that I've been smoking right now is this fucking shit. This is what everybody's wanting. This is what I mean. Don't get me wrong. It's great fucking weed. Somebody just dropped by that grows organic soil too, and they gave this to me. But it's like that purple, like or jealousy. It all has that. It all has that trop cookies,
Trop cookies,
heavy
terps,
smell in it,
where it's like
and it's all
very
lethal.
orange a little bit. You get a little like a tangy in there, but not heavy.
Yeah, it's that like
Is the
it's
trop
that
cherry?
like that artificial kind of grapey that has a little bit of like citrus in it.
Mhm.
I don't hate it. I like smoking it, but it seems like a lot of stuff have that in it around here, at least where we're at. And so I'd rather just see I like garlics, I like OGs, I like gas. I love Jack. I love Jack. I got an ounce from my boy the other day. Not the other day. I actually smoked through it. It was probably a month ago, but my boy Aaron, he grows some just amazing old school Jack, dude, and it's
Well,
still
the
holds.
really old school Jack was way better. Yeah, I mean the stuff we see as Jack in California is typically
J1.
very I like J1, and then J1 had a bubblegum. I made the J1 bubblegum cross a long time ago, but J1 I think is great. The Jack Flash is great. The classic Jack that was more of like musky and very complex compared to like the very lemony,
Yeah.
terpenoline, limonene Jack that's very linear. I don't like that, but I like the old Jacks.
Yeah, because the old Jack, it's got this peppery incense along with this kind of really earthy musk. Even though it does have that lemon and pine in there, it's mixed really well with that type of peppery incense and that overall musk. And so I don't know what it is, but the stuff gets me high, and this stuff doesn't just doesn't do it. And it's purple. It's all purple weed.
It's all
Everybody's growing
purple.
purple weed. I like purple weed. Nothing against purple weed. It's just I think that's what sells, man. I think that's what people have always loved, purple weed, and it is what it is. I think that you just kind of have to grow what your market demand is.
Yeah, and that's going to change over time. I mean, it's stuff is like popular for 2 months and then it's on to something new. And it seems like it's popular, but that eventually is going to stabilize because I mean, even with all these purple cultivars in these different profiles, they're not all that different. So eventually the market is going to stabilize a lot more. People are going to go with stuff they like. I mean, yeah, we like trying new stuff, but like I don't see it as being this way in 5 years. I think it's going to, people are going to have their one flavor that they're known for, their five flavors that they're known for.
And that's what I preach, because I tell people all the time, like I don't advocate for like I don't want deli style taken away. I don't want legislation taken away. I want people to be able to still have that type of experience. But I tell people that the consumer is visually driven. And so if you have a SKU and a package and things, a label and everything else, and it's consistent in the product inside, it's going to build brand recognition. And the way that, I've always told people when I'm talking about, building out a brand is, you know, the large percent of the consumer market isn't really highly educated on the products that they're consuming. So if you can make a product that's highly relatable to them, like having something like blueberry, somebody understands blueberry,
Right.
or they understand root beer, or they understand watermelon blast. It doesn't you like if you can kind of get something that matches the description of what you're giving them and make it kind of general. I think that's why so many of the candy brands and stuff like that have worked so well, is because they're relatable to the general public,
Sure.
and you don't necessarily need to have a lot of hype. I think it just needs to be relatable to people who are interested, because I've been smoking for a long ass time, and I forget there's new consumers daily. Another thing too is I see a lot of success working with like the Craft Farmers Alliance. When we're all working together, we're not all growing the same thing. Not everybody's growing permanent marker right now. Not everybody's growing rainbow shirt. Not everybody's growing Mac one. Like Red Dirt will be growing his meat and jam and his papaya, and then Banana Seat Botanicals is going to be doing her lemon cherry gelato and her farm cookie cut crosses, and then 4-H Farms is going to be running something different, completely different. And so it's kind of like keeping a community network together that can help facilitate SKUs. So like, okay, these are their SKUs for these people, so we're not all fucking growing the same thing.
Absolutely. Well, man, it was really great having you on today. If somebody is out there and they want to get in touch with you, they want to find out more about your company, about what you do, they want to get some testing done, how do they get a hold of you?
BokashiEarthworks.com, which is Bokashi Earthworks, all one word. You can also find me on Instagram at rust.brandon and Bokashi Earthworks, and reach out. I have made myself pretty accessible to people so they can ask questions, and I like to help people be successful, especially if they're using my products. I want to advocate for the people that are doing that, and make sure that they can continue to have success. So reach out, DM me. I'm always willing to chat and give advice. So thanks. I appreciate you having me on the show, dude.
Yeah, man, you next time you're in California, come to the facility, come check us out. I'd love to give you a tour, get you on another podcast. We can dive into some really cool stuff. Yeah, I'd love to share some of my stuff I'm working on with you privately. I got a book coming out, so we'll talk about that soon.
Nice. Yeah, that'd be great, man. If you need any help with any of the nutrient type stuff. And and also if you want to check out any of the products, man, just hit me up. I can send you all kinds of stuff. I've got a lot of cool stuff, man, that you probably dig.
Really awesome. Well, thank you again, man. We appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Cool, dude. I'll talk to you soon.